Today on LA Currents, tourism was one of the hardest hit sectors by the pandemic. However, as restrictions continue to lift, you can rediscover LA and start planning that convention, meeting, or staycation. Next, drug trafficking is not a victimless crime. It is a nationwide problem that poses many threats and continues to leave a devastating trail. But first, he is a USC law professor and leading expert on racial and criminal injustice. Anita Bennett interviews Jody Armour.
Over the past year, we've seen nationwide protests calling for an end to racial injustice and police brutality. But has anything really changed? Well, joining me to discuss these issues is Jody Armour.
Very good to be with you.
Yeah, so has anything changed?
In some ways, ain't nothing changed but what year it is. You know, I wrote a book about this in 1997. I talked about brutality at the front end with respect to police officers and at the back end with respect to the criminal justice jails and prison systems. Not much has changed in that intervening 20 plus years.
In terms of the LAPD, are they doing things right, in your opinion?
They're resisting the fundamental demand that's been made by the activists and protesters in the street that you heard coming out last summer, and that was to unbundle the police. We recognize that in this country, we've given the police too many tasks. We've saddled them with too many burdens, right? We've made them our street-level social workers. Rather than spending at the front end on care and concern for our citizens, providing affordable housing, affordable health care and the like, we allow criminogenic conditions to fester. And then when crime comes out of those criminogenic conditions, which is very foreseeable, we make police our problem solvers. Yes. We send them in and we make our jails the receptacles of our social failures. And so now the police are thrown in this nearly impossible position when we do that to them of trying to move our social failures. Every crime is a social policy failure, can be looked at that way, from the street to the jail cells. And they're creating a reservoir of resentment in the process between them and the communities that they police.
I mean, these are issues that are certainly not going to go away very, very soon. I mean, we've had these problems for decades.
We've had them for decades, and we have to say to ourselves now, the fact that we keep having these same problems for decades, we keep waking up to the same racial injustice Groundhog Day over and over again, is telling us that our old solutions aren't working, right? Maybe we need new solutions. Maybe our old understandings of the problems have been misguided, frankly, right?
A lot has changed in the past 6 months since President Trump left office. Do you think that there's a potential for race relations to get better now that we don't have someone in the White House talking about, you know, the Asian flu or Mexicans are rapists or LeBron James is dumb?
We may have, we may make a lot of progress, but we may not. It's easy to forget sometimes that in between 92 and 2000, we had one of an explosion in the new Jim Crow. We had more black bodies locked up, you know, between 92 and 2000 than 40 years before, 50 years before, right? Clinton came in with Joe Biden at the helm with harsher laws, the 94 crime bill, right? And before that, we had the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which over half the Congressional Black Caucus supported. So a lot of the folks, mass incarceration, racialized mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow, has been a bipartisan affair, right, for a long time, right? For both Republicans and Democrats have been pushing for the carceral state for 30 or 40 years, and now we're rethinking that.
Yeah.
Angelenos have brought in George Gascon, a progressive prosecutor. The Angelenos voted for Measure J, basically a defund the police measure, 10% of the LA unrestricted budget, which is up to $1 billion a year, $10 billion overall, up to $1 billion a year.
Yeah, but there's already talk of recalling Gascon.
Right.
He just got in office.
Yeah, there's going on. What's more predictable than pushback? What's more predictable? There's going to be pushback and rear guard maneuvers wavering, right, from the status quo. You expect that because we're talking about a revolution in consciousness that voters have led, right? Voters in California led with 3 strikes laws about 30 or 40 years ago. They led the nation, right? We were one of the most punitive states in the union. But over the last 7, 8 years, California has led the nation in going in the other direction. Proposition 47, taking all of these felonies down to misdemeanors. Proposition 57, legalizing marijuana. Voting in Chesa up in San Francisco. George Gascon down here. Measure J. The voters have led the politicians in a lot of ways.
Voters have, but crime is rising.
Yeah, but crime goes up and down. You would expect crime to go up, wouldn't you, in a once-in-a-century pandemic when people have lost their jobs and are desperate, more desperate than ever before. They've already, many of them, been scratching out barely in existence, and now over the past year, we've caused even greater misery. Why would that be connected to the election of one DA who just got in 6 months ago?
He just got in, but I'm not going to put this crime on regular citizens. We're letting more folks out of prisons as a result of COVID and other issues, and that's a big factor.
But demonstrate that that's a factor in the rise in crime. That's the question. Does letting more folks out mean they cause the rise in crime? Or could something like COVID? Correlation is not causation, right? We have COVID sitting right here in the middle that's making any of our inferences noisy about causal connections. And what we are finding, there's some recent studies, for example, out of Boston University that found that actually arresting people for misdemeanors makes it more likely that they're going to do felonies down the road. So our broken windows approach to policing for so long has actually been counterproductive. So sometimes we have to question what seems like common sense and look at the facts, look at the data. What does it say? Follow the data and the information. And what it's all saying is that we are wasting a lot of resources on a bloated punishment bureaucracy. You know, police, jails, prisons. Police, when they spend 5% of their time responding to calls that could be in any way characterized as violent, 5%. That means 95% of their time is spent doing what? You know, exactly, right? All communities, a lot of communities, I can't think of a community that doesn't want murders and rapes solved in their community. Right? Every community wants that. But police are doing a horrible job at solving murders and rapes, right? And the clearance rate in a lot of cities is 35%, 40% or less, right? And that's because police are not solving those crimes. The clearance rate is going down.
So why do you say they're not solving those crimes? Is it because they're too focused on other issues like addressing, dealing with unhoused individuals and things like that?
Two things. Yes, one, going after turnstile jumpers and unhoused individuals and broken, windows kind of policing kinds of things. That siphons off a lot of resources. Number one, and then number two, over here, it's resource intensive to go after violent, to solve crimes. It takes a lot of woman and manpower. And so if that is going over in another direction, it can't be directed where it can do the most good for communities that are crying out for effective law enforcement. And so the other big problem is there's no community trust and confidence. The way you solve crimes is by having a trust and confidence relationship with community members who will help you solve those crimes, right? Yeah. But if you have an adversarial relationship with these community members, you can't do your job. Your job is to solve crimes. You can't do it.
That is a blanket statement. There's no trust. I would
say no trust, not no trust. I don't mean to say no trust.
Thank you.
But here's what you do have. The polls show in the black community, 62% say lack of trust and confidence in police. So that's not everybody by any means, but the majority, a significant majority. But those same communities say they want police in their communities, right? The same, at like a 65-70% rate. It's almost a contradiction, sounds like it, but I think what you're saying, I'm agreeing with you in a lot of ways. What people are saying is, I don't have trust and confidence because I can't turn on the TV without seeing another incident. So that's, of course, going to rob me of a lot of trust and confidence on the one hand. On the other hand, I don't want to be a crime victim. And I want to minimize crime. I'd like to be able to cooperate with police more. I'd like there to be more trust and confidence there. We got to get there somehow. The number one way we got to get there is you got to stop shooting people. on camera under, egregious circumstances that a lot of us look at and drop our jaws at. That just has to end. Now, how that's going to end, police don't seem to have been able to get out of their way from doing that over the last year or so, right? They've been under a microscope. While the Chauvin trial was going on, you had Daunte Wright arise.
Exactly.
Let's radically rethink safety and community and get out of a punitive response to our social problems and come up with a non-punitive one.
Well, this has certainly been a lively conversation. Jody Armour, thank you so much for being here.
Many factors affect our post-pandemic travel. We sit down with Doane and Adam Burke, who offer useful information on tourism in LA. A beautiful afternoon in the city of Los Angeles. Makes you want to kind of get out and explore. Well, there's a couple people here this afternoon that will tell you where you should go and how you can enjoy it. I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Burke and Doane. The outlook is really good for travel and tourism. I mean, here we are, we're excited about being out, but the pandemic really kind of shook the foundation of the entire industry, didn't it, Adam?
So while certainly we're going to have a long road ahead of us, there's every reason to be optimistic about what the rest of this year is going to look like. But to your question, absolutely. If you look back to 2019, before the pandemic, travel and tourism had become the fourth largest employment sector in LA County. In fact, we had over 544,000 Angelenos who were employed in tourism-related careers. Beyond that, visitors to Los Angeles spent $26 billion in our local businesses. And even in terms of what it did for residents of LA, because guests staying in hotels pay a transient occupancy tax, a hotel tax, that contributed over $315 million to the city's general fund, supporting essential services like streets and sanitation, fire, arts and cultural programming. So if you look back at 2020, it's impossible to overstate just how devastating it was for our industry. But honestly, Maria, the thing that I find most heartbreaking about it is, in our sector, we saw job losses of 1 in 3.
Oh, no.
So that's about 165,000 Angelenos who were displaced during the pandemic.
That is then, now we need to kind of, as you said, look forward to what's happening when it comes to LA tourism that is giving both of you a reason to be a little bit more optimistic.
Recently, we've heard that almost 75% of people have travel plans for this summer, and so we know that the LA area is one of the places they want to visit, and we're going to do what we can to make sure that they're welcome here.
I'm creating a mythical family that lives in the Midwest somewhere that's going to come out and visit you, and you're going to get them for 4 days. Where are you taking them?
The first place everyone wants to go is the beach.
Right.
So we'll make sure we stop at the beach. I personally love the hiking trail behind the Griffith Observatory. I would probably sneak into Koreatown, where we can get some great food. And lastly, I got to take them to my hometown within the city of LA, and that's San Pedro.
All right, your turn.
My turn, same question. So in the valley, I would go visit the Japanese gardens. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm a big Harry Potter fan, as are our kids, so I'd probably go to Universal Studios Hollywood. You've got to go to, Venice or Hermosa or one of the beach communities. And then, I'd probably land here in downtown and take them to a Kings game at Staples.
So are we ready? I mean, what's happening in the city that makes you feel, okay, we're ready, everybody can come on back?
That's a great question. I think, one of the things that LA County has really done right, the city, the county, and the state for that matter, is really led with health and safety. One of the things I've heard some people say is that somehow economic recovery and health and safety are at odds with each other, and I couldn't disagree more. I think the way we have a sustainable reopening of our economy is to lead with health and safety. So I really want to thank Dr. Barbara Ferrer and the team at LA County Health. One of the things I think was a brilliant idea, and they did this early on in the pandemic, was they formed the LA County Economic Resiliency Task Force. And what they did is they basically said they certainly understand the science of how to mitigate the spread of COVID. But they were the first to say we don't necessarily understand each specific industry sector. So they partnered with over a dozen different industry verticals to say, all right, let's say you're in the hotel and restaurant category. You know how to put together protocols that you can safely implement and that you know will create a positive guest experience. Why don't you as industry leaders develop those protocols, bring them to public health, and then we'll vet them against the science.
And that was really a good, the result of being thoughtful and deliberate. I know it was painful for a lot of people to, have their businesses affected the way they are, but it's proven that we've come back strong and we're coming back earlier than many regions in the state.
Let's talk right now. Obviously things are opening up, and as we sit here next to the Broad, a lot of our cultural institutions are opening up. What exactly is the plan to promote tourism back to Los Angeles again? Who are you reaching at this moment in time? Are you trying to keep it more domestic? Are you actually looking at our overseas friends? Or, or we're just really kind of trying to celebrate Los Angeles to the people who are within driving distance?
That's a great plan for that.
Okay.
Yes, so I guess the first thing I would say is you referenced again, these incredible arts and cultural attractions. One of kind of the hidden secrets about LA that most people don't know, we actually have more museums per capita than any city in the U.S.
I know, I read that I was like, what?
If you were to ask people where you think that would be, LA probably wouldn't be on the top of their mind, but actually, between our museums and performing arts venues, we've got the most robust cultural scene in the country. So I think that's a huge testament to the Broad and Eli Broad's vision. But in terms of recovery, it's really been flipped on its head. So historically, we've been really focused on the international markets because candidly, they're the most lucrative. If you think about international visitors, they come and stay the longest and they spend the most. So that's one of the reasons why Los Angeles is actually the only destination in the country that has our own offices and full-time team members in 7 international locations, because that international business is critical. In fact, an international visitor spends about 2.5 times what a domestic traveler will. But during the pandemic, it had to start closer to home. So the first thing we did is we launched a program called LA Love. We'd love to make it easier and more affordable for Angelenos to get out and safely explore their backyard. So we had over 100 special offers that were designed by Angelenos for Angelenos. Now if you fast forward to where we are today, we're back in the market advertising not just to drive markets, but for the first time since the pandemic, our domestic flight markets, because we're seeing a strong return there as well.
Los Angeles is a movie. The lighting is perfect. Soundtrack. It's just right. Costumes are incredible. The sets are amazing. Everyone's here, ready for the next scene. LA is a movie. It's a musical.
Es un musical.
It's a comedy.
It's a romance.
It's a sci-fi movie.
It's an action movie.
It's a comeback story.
It's a comeback story.
It's a comeback story.
It's a comeback story.
It's a comeback story. Un regreso.
It's a comeback story.
Nah, hold up. It's your comeback story.
It's a national campaign that's really emotive and effective, and it's really going to bring a lot of people here to Los Angeles.
What's it called?
Start your comeback.
Start your comeback. And actually, that's kind of the theme. I mean, after the year we've all had, particularly because, LA is the entertainment capital of the world. Everybody loves a good comeback story. And for us, 21 is the year of LA's comeback. It's time for us all to, safely get out and explore our community again.
You were in your position just a couple years before COVID hit. It must have really been a bit of a shakeup in regards to what you were able to do during 2020. But what are some of the things you put on the table in 2020 that you can't wait to, bring back into the priority role?
Well, that's a perfect segue into what we call the Tourism Master Plan.
Ooh,
so
cool.
it's a project that we undertook, actually when the department was formed 5 years ago. One of the charges was to develop a strategic plan for the tourism industry and for tourism as a whole within the city of Los Angeles. And what it does is really take a head-to-toe assessment of every tourism asset that the city has, and really looks at what it's going to take to enhance those assets, what assets we need to grow in the future, and what we need to do as a city, and that's everybody in the city government, from our little tourism department to the police department to the planning department to DOT. What are the things we need to do as a city to prepare ourselves for the inevitable increase in tourism that's coming after this pandemic is over?
Absolutely. Adam Doane, thanks so much.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks for having us, Maria.
He's a 28-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Agency. Special Agent in Charge, Bill Bodner, is here to discuss his extensive career and how he continues to serve LA by fighting the sale and distribution of illegal narcotics. The CDC reported over 81,000 overdose deaths for the 12 months ending in May of 2020. That's a tragic scenario, but here to help us understand what's going on, I am delighted to be joined by the DEA Special Agent in Charge, Bill Bodner. So nice to have you here.
Thank you.
That is that's the most reported deaths from drug overdose that has ever been in a 12-month period in the United States. What is going on?
The root of this problem was 15 years ago, Maria. We started with an opiate epidemic that was really driven by prescription drugs. And there was a very small percentage of medical practitioners who, quite frankly, were unethical. And they prescribed drugs without medical necessity, and it was based on greed. That's what was the driving factor. Unfortunately, we developed addiction. Opiate drugs are extremely powerful, extremely addictive. We developed this group of people that had an addiction, and then as we learned what we could do better, as we cut down the number of prescriptions, but what's happened? We have these people that are addicted, and they've turned to the black market to get prescription drugs. And unfortunately, these black market prescription drugs contain fentanyl. And that's what we see playing out on the streets, and that's what's killing people in our community. It's fentanyl, it's extremely deadly, and it's in almost all of the counterfeit prescription drugs that are changing hands on the streets today.
Okay, so let's talk about fentanyl, because as you said, that's literally the most, that's the drug that is killing the most amount of people when it comes to drug overdose.
Fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin, and it's available in a little pill that looks like a prescription drug that some of us have taken legitimately. So there's no fear of it. People are not afraid to experiment with it. And that's why we're seeing the tremendous destruction from fentanyl and all these overdoses.
And the amount required to actually kill you is minuscule.
Tiny. It could be 2 milligrams. 2 milligrams. 2 milligrams could be enough to kill you. And in these pills, the dosing is very inconsistent. So even if you knew what the drug was, which many times people don't, they think it's something else, but even if you knew what it was, it's still so dangerous to take because you don't know the dose. You may think, I tolerated this pill before, but the dose now could be 80% more in the same pill.
With the expansion of online services, we're all used to there's lots and lots and lots of legitimate sites in which you can get prescription meds, but there's a proliferation of those that are, is it expanding? Is it coming in online, or is this a street thing, or where is it coming from?
So earlier I said to get heroin you had to go to a part of town that was perhaps high crime, right? Imagine now you could have a 14, 16-year-old at home with a smartphone, can go online to an online marketplace or social media app, and I have my phone set to alert me when a new ad goes up. So I see new ads go up literally every day for these drugs. You can go online, you can order it, have it delivered to your house, and you can pay for it using an online payment thing and not have to leave the house. That's what the danger is. So we have young people, teenagers, buying drugs on social media sites, and let's be honest, they're being victimized, right? They're being victimized. There's children being victimized by these dealers doing this. The parents don't know that this is going on, and the drugs are being delivered right to the house.
Legitimate prescription drugs. Twice a year, the DEA sponsors what is called, take back, and that's obviously something that is also needs to be addressed. People have meds in their house, and if somebody no longer needs them and they have an excess of them, that is a problem as well.
It is. As I said, if there's one thing, that I hope we learned in the early days of the opiate crisis, it is that whether we're talking about a national scale or the micro scale right in our own homes, excess drugs can lead to recreational drug use, and that can lead to addiction. There was a time around 2010, 2011 where we spoke with heroin addicts and we said, how did you find yourself addicted to heroin? These are people in treatment. How did you find yourselves addicted to heroin? What path did you go down? 4 out of 5 times it was prescription drugs where it started. The light went off with DEA. We said we need to do something preventive. We need to get these excess drugs that are in people's homes, have them disposed of properly and safely, and remove that risk factor. I think there's a couple things I stress with people about prescription drugs in the home. First is, of course, it goes without saying, when you're prescribed a drug, take it as prescribed by the doctor, right? But if that prescription is as needed for pain, hold yourself accountable and make sure that you're taking it as needed for pain, that you don't become a recreational user. That can lead to disaster. The Centers for Disease Control tell us that if you take a 10-day course of an opiate painkiller, there's a 50% chance that you'll still be taking the drug a year later and that you'll be addicted to the drug. So that's why we've seen doctors now cut what used to be those 30-day, 10-day courses of painkillers down to 5 and 3 days, because that reduces the risk exponentially. But what I would tell people is safely dispose of the drugs that are in your home. If there's drugs that you can't dispose of, think about where you're storing them and how you're storing them. It's unfortunate, but we have people in our homes all the time. We think we know them. Some of them we don't know. Maybe our children have friends in. They check the medicine cabinets. They look in the medicine cabinets, they see what's there. It could be a contractor that's in your house to do some work, checking your medicine cabinet to see if there's free prescription drugs there. So do something to protect the drugs that you do need and that you are taking. Maybe it's something simple like a little steel box the size of a shoebox with a 3-digit combination, and you can keep it in your kitchen cupboard. Something over just leaving those bottles in the medicine cabinet. And I think with those 2 things, we can really be a little more preventive and stop the problems before they start.
DEA has several projects. What are these things, and how do they fit into getting the word out about protecting people from drug overdose or from even becoming, a victim of something?
So it's interesting when I describe what our mission at DEA is to people. Many times they're surprised to hear what I say. A lot of times people will confuse the tools we use or the strategy we employ with our actual mission. Our mission is simple: drug harm reduction, right? That is our mission. And that doesn't just come through law enforcement, through making arrests. It comes through education. It comes through reducing the demand for these drugs. I really think that a lot more needs to be done in these areas, especially with the counterfeit prescription drugs, where there's going to be such a benefit from letting people know that these aren't the drugs they think they are. There's a lot of mileage there. A lot of good comes of that. So that's what we decided at DEA, is we need to be a little more holistic and to really evaluate and see where we can add value throughout the different areas to really try to reduce drug harm across the board.
Let's bring it down to a more manageable level, in that it's also really important, I would think, for adults to communicate with children, teachers to communicate with students, parents to communicate with their kids. So what are some of the messages that are appropriate to share with young people who, this is something that they may not even be cognizant of or aware of? What information would you want to be able to start the conversation with?
I mean, the first general message, right? The general message that I would say to all children is find something in life that you're passionate about, right? Don't let drugs distract you from that passion, and don't ever let drugs become your passion. Then to parents, I would say, be nosy. I hate to say it, but be nosy. Don't make the assumption that, especially with these counterfeit pills, that your children's friends don't know about them, or your child doesn't know about them, or they're not in the school where your child goes. These discussions go on amongst our children all the time. Interject yourself into that conversation. So monitor what your children are doing and don't feel the least bit guilty about it.
I'm glad you told us all of this. It's incredibly terrifying, but it's also incredibly important to get this information out there. So thank you. And if people want to learn more about what's going on and what's happening with the DEA and how they can be more aware and alert and all the tools that you provide, what's the best thing?
The best thing you can do, you follow us on Twitter here in Los Angeles at DEA Los Angeles, and our website is dea.gov, and it will have everything on there that you need with regards to DEA. You can navigate it and find whatever information you're looking for.
Well, keep up the good work, Special Agents. Really, really fascinating to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on this LA Current.